So if you're opened up to Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, it says, "For grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast." So let me start this with a question. Have you ever received a gift so generous, so undeserved, that it left you speechless? Maybe it was a scholarship that you didn't think you'd get, a stranger paying your bill at a restaurant, or someone forgiving a debt you can never repay. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a gift even greater than those, the gift of salvation. A gift we could never earn, never repay, and yet one that's been given freely by God through Jesus Christ. So let's look again. Let's look again at the first part of this passage. For grace you have been saved. Some of y'all wonder, what is grace? And grace is God's unmerited favor. It's God giving us something good that we don't deserve. Let me illustrate it in another way. If that doesn't capture your mind yet. Imagine you're speeding down the highway and you get pulled over and you were wrong. Speeding is wrong, even though we all do it. And you're expecting a ticket. But instead of the cop writing you up or giving you a ticket, the officer just tears up that ticket and gives you a gift card for gas and says, "Drive safe." That's not just mercy. Not getting the ticket you deserve. That's grace. Getting a gift you didn't earn. That's what God has done for us. Romans chapter 3, verse 23 says, "All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." We were speeding through life, breaking all kinds of spiritual laws, heading for a penalty. But God didn't just cancel our penalty. He gave us life, hope, purpose, and a future. Grace is God loving us while we're still unlovable. Romans 5:8 reminds us, "But God demonstrates his love for us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us." There's a famous story y'all might have heard about a man who was sentenced to death. Someone else offered to take his place, and the judge allowed it. The guilty man went free because someone else took that punishment. And that's what Jesus did for us. Now, Paul continues here in the scripture that we're on, saying through faith. So, if grace is the gift, then faith is the hand that receives it. Faith means trusting in what Jesus has done, his life, death, and resurrection, as enough to save you. But here's what faith is not. It's not just believing that God exists. James 2:19 says even demons believe that. Faith is not trying harder to be good. Faith is dependence. It's leaning your full weight of your life on Jesus. Think of a chair. You can look at it, study it, even admire it. Why not? That's a nice looking chair. And still be standing. But when you sit down, when you trust that chair to hold you, that's faith. And unfortunately, some people have more faith in chairs than they do Jesus. Saving faith is putting all your trust in Jesus, not in yourself. It's saying, I can't save myself, but I trust you, Jesus, to do what I cannot. I remember a time when I thought being good was the way to heaven. I tried to do all the right things, go to church, be kind, pray, but I always felt empty. Why? Because I was trusting my goodness, not God's grace. And it wasn't until I truly surrendered and said, "God, I need you," that I found real peace. In verse 9, Paul is very clear. not a result of works, so that no one may boast. We live in a world where everything is earned. You work, you get paid. You study, you get a grade. It may not be a good one, but you get a grade. You train and you win a trophy. But salvation flips that upside down. You don't work for it. You receive it. Let's go back to the thief on the cross. He had no time to do good deeds. He couldn't join a church or serve in ministry. All he could do was say, "Jesus, remember me." And what did Jesus say? "Today you will be with me in paradise." Why? Because salvation is not by works. It's by grace through faith. Let me be clear on something. Good works, they matter. I'm not trying to say don't go out there and do good things. Good works do matter. They're the evidence of salvation. But they're not the entry ticket. You know what I mean? So when we talk about so no one may boast, why did God design it this way? So you think to yourself, so no one can boast. I want you to imagine heaven as a party. If we got there by our good deeds, it would be a competition. I volunteered 20 years. I gave thousands to charity. I read my Bible every day. Woohoo! But in heaven, the only banner that will be there is Jesus saves. No boasting, just worship. No pride, just gratitude. Picture a drowning man that's being pulled from the ocean by a lifeguard. You really think he's going to brag about how well he swam? He might. He might if he's prideful or ignorant. But what he should do is thank the one who rescued him. And that's Jesus to us. So how can we respond to this truth? We can stop striving and start trusting. Are you trying to earn God's love? And if so, stop. Rest in His grace. Receive the gift of grace. It's a gift that must be accepted. Ask yourself, have you received God's gift of salvation? Are you living and resting in His grace? We can live in gratitude. Like I said, good works don't save us, but it's how we say thank you. And let's return to our key verse for a second. And we'll wrap it up by ending off of this. For grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. Grace. You can't earn it. You don't deserve it. But it's yours freely. You just have to accept it. And if you never accepted this gift, today is your day. And if you have, live in a way that reflects your gratitude. So let us not be people who boast not in ourselves, but in the cross of Jesus Christ.